The State Department has announced a boycott of Jews in Judea, Iran, Iran. Headlines abound. Let's go into them. And who's making Israel a partisan issue? Details on all of this in my cold open next. Late Friday afternoon last week, when everybody was thinking about their weekend plans, the State Department quietly, might say even surreptitiously, delivered the news to Congress. The State Department has decided that they're going to reimpose geographical constraints on U.S.-Israel academic cooperation. And those geographical constraints, which were lifted in the late days of the Trump administration, now make Jews in Judea and Samaria and Jewish institutions in Judea and Samaria out of bounds for U.S. scientific and other cooperation projects. Responding to the news, the senior vice president of Ariel University, Bobby Brown, wrote the following, and I think a very important Facebook post. He said this: under the last administration, the U.S. government removed all geographical limitations as criteria for applying for U.S. government funding for breakthrough research. This allowed Ariel University the right to compete against every other university and research center in the world, putting Ariel University's scientists and researchers in the difficult but fair standing competing against the best and the brightest. Ariel University, with its top-level medical school, its top-level engineering school, and so many others entered this competition gladly. And what were the results? 3 major research grants were awarded to Ariel University projects that would benefit mankind. There should be no political limitations on research that benefits society or the health and safety and well-being of the world's populations. 2 generations ago, it was the hated Nazis who limited Jewish scientists from making breakthroughs only because of where they lived and the fact that they were Jewish. It seems like the State Department has revised this disgusting and anti-Jewish practice to again exclude scientists who are working on new vaccines and engineering researchers who are trying to solve the world's problems of fresh, clean water. Then he goes on and talks about how the Palestinians themselves benefit from Ariel's groundbreaking medical research. He says here, on behalf of Ariel University, I recently applied to the State Department's USAID. I asked for a fund that would pay the cost for Palestinians to receive medical services given in Ariel University's new medical center. It is time to rid the world of the racist and BDS mentality in the State Department and in the administration and allow cooperation, good health, joint projects, and peace to reign. The alternatives are truly horrific. Indeed, they are. And Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, of course, and a great friend of Israel's, has been leading the charge to expose the anti-Semitism of the State Department's decision to boycott the Jews of Judea and of Samaria. He wrote here in a statement that came out, I think, last night, Joe Biden and the Biden administration officials are pathologically obsessed with undermining Israel. Since day one of their administration, they have launched campaigns against our Israeli allies that are granular, whole of government, and done in secret. This new boycott of Israeli Jews is yet another example. The State Department is telling the entire U.S. government not to cooperate with Jews in Judea and Samaria, and of course it was sent to Congress in secret and only revealed because the reporters found out. The Biden administration defends funding scientific research in Wuhan with the Chinese Communist Party, but they're discriminating against and banning cooperation with Jews based on where they live. I will do everything possible to reverse this decision and prohibit such anti-Semitic discrimination by the U.S. government in the future. Oof. So again, what we're seeing here is that the Biden administration has decided to officially reinstate a racially based discriminatory policy regarding U.S. scientific cooperation with educational entities in Judea and Samaria. They'll continue to fund, research and other grants with Palestinian universities, Palestinian scientists, but not with Jewish institutions and Jewish scientists. By the way, I should add that this is an official statement, right? However, we've seen unofficial boycotts of Israel in the past. There was a NASA scientist who was actually supposed to participate in a conference, I believe, at Bar-Ilan University. This was just an Israeli university. And she announced on her Twitter page, the day that she was supposed to arrive, that she was informed by the State Department that her travel papers had been denied, that they didn't want to get her involved with traveling to Israel. So that the United States, the State Department, has unofficially already been implementing this program for some months. And now it's become American policy officially through this late Friday afternoon statement. And that brings me to the second point that I wanted to talk about. I don't know why my eye is a little bit watery right now. Anyway, it's about Iran. So first, we've had a lot of new developments on the Iranian front. And the first one I want to discuss with you is a report by the Middle East Media Research Institute, MEMRI, about intelligence reports that were put out in the first 6 months of 2023 by the Swedish, German, and Dutch intelligence agencies regarding Iranian efforts to procure dual-use technologies for the construction of nuclear weapons in 2022. Okay, so just want to read you two paragraphs from this. MEMRI notes, first of all, that according to these intelligence reports by Germany against Sweden and the Netherlands, Iran is sending its agents to Europe to procure dual-use technologies that will enable it to build nuclear weapons. This should be, of course, front-page news on every newspaper front page throughout the world. But it works out that the countries themselves, the media in Sweden, in Germany, and in the Netherlands have all been hiding this story. This is how MEMRI puts it. It is newsworthy that media outlets in the Netherlands, Sweden, and Germany have largely not reported on their country's intelligence findings about Iran's illicit nuclear proliferation activities in Sweden, the Netherlands, and Germany. In one telling example of the Iranian regime's illicit nuclear weapons proliferation activities, the Swedish Security Service said in its annual report published in February of 2023 that, quote, Iran engages in industrial espionage, which is mainly aimed at the Swedish high-tech industry and Swedish products that it can be used in a nuclear weapons program. So again, there's no kind of effort to deny the fact any longer that Iran is seeking to develop and field nuclear weapons, right? These are Western European intelligence services, all NATO members, who are saying that Iran on our territory is seeking in our high-tech industries technologies and material that will enable it to build nuclear weapons. Another thing that we just got news of today, I'm taping this on Monday, is that two major terrorist plots by Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, one in Cyprus, an EU member, and one in Greece, another EU member, were just exposed. They were trying in Cyprus. There were 3 different Jewish targets that they were planning to attack, and similarly, they were planning on attacking Jewish targets apparently in Greece. So this is the IRGC, which the United States defined as terrorist organization, but the Biden administration has long been acting to persuade Britain, for instance, not to define the IRGC, or the European Union to define the IRGC as a terrorist organization. So they're actively organizing terrorist attacks on European soil. They're not designated a terrorist organization all the same, in large part because the Biden administration has been lobbying these governments in Europe and the EU and Britain specifically not to designate the IRGC a terrorist organization. So the Iranians are seeking to procure nuclear weapons capabilities by buying dual-use technology and material in at least 3 EU member states, or in at least 3 European countries, now that Sweden has joined NATO, all NATO members. And their media and the international media has imposed a blackout on this news. That's one thing. The other thing is that the IRGC is actively organizing to conduct terrorist attacks in 2 European Union member states, in Greece and in Cyprus, and acting at the behest of the Biden administration. At least reportedly, both the EU and Britain have so far avoided designating the IRGC as a terrorist organization. And then the last piece of Iran news that I wanted to mention before I go into a little bit of an analysis of this is that over the past week, two acts have been carried out by European governments against Iranian opposition movements or activists. So the National Council of Resistance in Iran, otherwise known as the Mujahideen al-Haq, is one of the major, perhaps the best organized Iranian opposition groups outside of Iran, and it's been active for decades. There have been allegations, and I think some of them are true, that the MEC engaged in terrorist activities in the past, but it hasn't for a very long time. At any rate, the MEC is openly active in Paris and in other cities around Europe, and they've organized mass rallies against the Iranian regime and in support of the cause of freedom in Iran over the past year, in particular throughout the Mahsa Amini protests that nearly overturned the Iranian regime last year, beginning last September, with the murder of Mahsa Amini, the Kurdish Iranian woman, for not fully covering her hair with a hijab. So the MEC was supposed to have another mass rally against the Iranian regime that tens of thousands of people from throughout Europe were expected to participate in Paris on July 1st. And shockingly, last week, the Macron government informed the MEC, or the National Council of Resistance in Iran, that they would not receive a permit to carry out their protest. And according to a France 24 report, this was due to pressure from the Iranian government. And in an effort to appease the Iranians, French authorities decided to ban Iranian opposition forces from opposing the regime that, again, is illicitly procuring the means to develop nuclear weapons through their illicit nuclear weapons program. They're organizing to carry out terrorist attacks on European soil. But all the same, the French government has decided not to allow the MEC to carry out this rally. And I'll just add, I think that it was at a MEC rally in 2019 in Paris that the Iranians had intended to kill the former, I think he was former at the time, U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton, although might have been, anyway, they were planning on assassinating him in Paris, and the Iranian agents that were involved in organizing and planning this attack were arrested in Belgium, and they were tried and found guilty and put in jail. But just a couple of weeks ago, Belgian authorities released the Iranian terrorists in question back to Iran in exchange for Belgian hostages being held by the regime in Tehran. So this is, the Iranian regime definitely sees the MEC as a threat, and they've been acting against the MEC in countries around the world, and particularly in Paris, but not only, for decades. So the Parisian authorities, the French authorities, decided to block the MEC's rally. And then another thing that happened was that I think it was yesterday, Fox News reported that the Albanian police just raided a MEC refugee camp in Albania, and that they were allegedly acting at the request of the Biden administration. So in response to this one, Senator Cruz put out another statement that I also just want to read. He wrote on Twitter, "I'm deeply concerned that across Europe, and especially right now, France and Albania, our allies are appeasing the Iranian regime and cracking down on anti-regime dissidents. The Biden administration is reportedly supporting these pro-regime policies while also directly boosting the regime by sending the Ayatollah hundreds of billions of dollars and pushing for the release of terrorists. The crackdown and appeasement will embolden and enable the Iranian regime to commit more global terrorism. They pose a direct threat to the safety and security of Americans. And former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told Fox News Digital, by providing sanctions relief to the Iranian regime, President Biden and U.S. envoy to Iran negotiations, Robert Malley, are abandoning the Iranian people and enriching their oppressors. The regime is committed to crushing its own people while spreading terror and mayhem abroad, and the Biden administration's blind desire to appease and negotiate with it has made the world a more dangerous place. Pompeo visited the MEC headquarters last year, according to Fox News, and of course, the regime has been targeting Pompeo for assassination since the Trump administration killed IRGC commander Qasem Soleimani in 2019. So that's what's going on. And here I just want to point out a couple of things. First of all, my friend Michael Duran, who's been on this program in the past, wrote a really important article in Tablet magazine called "The Ties That Bind," and I recommend that all of you check it out, because what Mike did there in that article was something that I've been examining pretty consistently on this program, which is the question of what is the Biden administration's goal vis-a-vis Iran and its nuclear weapons program. And I think that Mike Duran makes the convincing case that the Biden administration's policy is to appease Iran even at the expense of Iran becoming a nuclear weapons, a nuclear state, a nuclear armed state, and a regional hegemon. That is the realignment strategy that Obama embarked on back, I would argue, in 2009, but certainly as an official U.S. policy beginning in 2013. And that's a policy that the Biden administration has adopted since its first day in office. And to this end of appeasing Iran and realigning the United States away from Israel and Sunni Arab neighbors, or its Sunni Arab partners led by Saudi Arabia, and siding at their expense with Iran in sort of what Obama referred to as a balance of power. The Biden administration views Israel and the notion that Israel may unilaterally strike Iran's nuclear weapons installations as the greatest threat to its policy. That is, if Israel, America's now spurned closest ally in the Middle East, takes unilateral action against Iran's nuclear weapons installations, then and the United States is accepting of Iran's nuclear weapons program as part of its larger goal of realigning the United States towards Iran, then Israel is the gravest threat to America's Middle Eastern policy goals. That is, again, let me just repeat, because it's such a mouthful, and it's such a departure from what everybody has come to expect from U.S. Middle East policy. Duran shows in his article that the United States, under the Biden administration, has had an almost obsessive focus on reaching a nuclear agreement with Iran, whether it's a 2015 accord or it's some new agreement that the outlines of which are basically that were reported was that Iran can enrich uranium up to 60%. It can keep the uranium stockpiles it's already amassed in contravention of international law and in contravention of the 2015 deal, and that in exchange the United States will not enforce the sanctions that already exist, and will not will not apply further sanctions on Iran. There's other stuff about releasing American hostages in exchange for a lot of money. So that's sort of the deal that's on the table right now, or going back to the 2015 deal with no price for Iran to pay for having breached it. And that whatever deal it is that's on the table, whatever deal it is that is agreed to either officially or unofficially to avoid congressional oversight, the basic idea of both is that Iran has already a nuclear power. It's a turn of the screw away from having nuclear weapons. It's amassed a sufficient quantity of enriched uranium to build, according to the U.S., up to 7 nuclear weapons at will. So it's to leave Iran as a state that's on the precipice of a nuclear arsenal, and to end U.S. economic sanctions on Iran, and so enrich it with hundreds of billions of dollars, up to $1 trillion just in the next by 2030, I think, according to the Foundation of for the Defense of Democracy. And the main obstacle standing in the way of achieving this goal is Israel, and Israel's rejection of the idea that Iran may be allowed to be a nuclear armed state. So, as Mike Duran shows in this article, which really ruined my weekend, by the way, because once you read it, you can't really stop thinking about his arguments, which are compelling. So what he shows is through a series of steps, both pretending that they're trying to engage Israel and Saudi Arabia or bring peace to Israel and Saudi Arabia when they're actually doing the opposite, or that their their military cooperation with Israel is unprecedented in scale and intimacy. And his contention is that the purpose of that cooperation is to keep Israel in a vise to prevent Israel from taking unilateral action against Iran and denying it the means to do so. So in every aspect, and undermining the stability of the Netanyahu government through support for the Israeli left against the government. All of these things are geared towards reaching the single goal of the Biden administration's Middle East policy, which is to realign the United States away from Israel and towards Iran, because the United States views Israel as a hindrance to the achievements of its both domestic and foreign policy goals. And so they want to undercut Israel. What can I tell you? Not only is it a compelling, while it is a compelling argument, it tells only 3/4 of the story, because the last quarter of the story is that there is another actor on the scene capable of scuttling the administration's policies. And that actor is what you might call the Iranian people. That the effort by the Iranian people to free themselves from the vise of the regime that kills it, that denies it the most basic civil rights, that denies it the ability to support itself, that oppresses it at every turn in every aspect of the lives of the people of Iran, that if they actually overthrow the regime, then that ruins the administration's effort to realign the United States towards the Iranian regime. They support, actually, the Iranian regime. And if you take Duran's argument and you see that the United States is, in fact, lobbying the French and the Albanians to take action to restrain the Iranian resistance, to restrain the Iranian opposition that operates in their countries at the behest and of the Iranian regime, then you see that here, too, the administration is allegedly involved with operations to undermine the ability of the Iranian people to seek freedom, whether outside of Iran or inside of Iran. And the one last thing that I want to say about this is, so here's the administration adopting an anti-Semitic policy in relation to Judea and Samaria, which makes discrimination against Jews in the cradle of Jewish civilization the official policy of the American government. And you add to that what's happening with Iran, it shouldn't come as a surprise that the U.S. Embassy is taking its partisan positioning of the U.S. government vis-a-vis Israeli politics to greater and greater heights, seemingly with every passing moment. So, one of the big gets in the social circle invite circuit, I guess, is to be invited to the U.S. Embassy July 4th party. So the Biden administration, generally speaking, traditionally, U.S. ambassadors, whether of Republican or Democratic presidents, have invited Israeli politicians, members of Knesset, party leaders from across the partisan divide. They've invited everybody because Israel is a U.S. ally. The Israeli people are highly supportive of the United States, and all of their political representatives have traditionally been invited to the U.S. Embassy July 4th parties, but not this year. Not this year. Tom Nides, Biden's outgoing ambassador, has really distinguished himself as the most political ambassador in U.S. history in terms of its relations with its host government. Nides has come down repeatedly and openly on the side of the left in its efforts to overthrow the Netanyahu government through often violent protests in Tel Aviv, and the harassment and assault and battery against Israeli political leaders, everywhere from Tel Aviv University to outside their homes throughout the country, and also in the United States when they went to New York earlier in this month, or in May, to participate in the New York Israel parade. Nides has not tried for even a moment to pretend that under the Biden administration, the U.S. government respects the wishes of the Israeli people, and instead he has sided with the Israeli left openly against the standing government of Israel, the Netanyahu government. So this is now reflected in a new policy, which is the policy of who gets invited to the U.S. Embassy July 4th party. And so what came out this morning, I think, in Haaretz, was that the Biden administration has decided not to invite senior government ministers, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, the public security minister, or any members of their Knesset factions to the July 4th party. But on the other hand, they are inviting not only all of the heads of the opposition parties on the left and the Arab parties, but they're also inviting the leaders of the anti-government protests, including former Prime Minister and Defense Minister Barak, who on Saturday night called for a domestic rebellion against the government, and he's called publicly for everybody to stop paying taxes and commit other felony crimes against the government and against the state of Israel. So here's Nides using this party as a way to show that the administration only supports certain Israelis. It doesn't support Israel. It doesn't support or want to have anything to do with Israeli Jews who live in Judea and Samaria. It's boycotting them as Jews living in these or operating in these geographical areas. They're not boycotting Arabs who live in these areas or operate in these areas, only Jews. And now they're also openly boycotting members of the government and the governing coalition. And here I just want to say, just think about what Mike Pompeo said, what David Friedman, the former ambassador, Nides' predecessor, came out very angrily against the boycott policy that was instituted last Friday, and Senator Cruz's repeated statements talking about how dangerous and bigoted Biden administration's policies against Israel are. These are people who never boycotted leftists, right? So Netanyahu is continuously accused by particularly liberal American Jews of transforming Israel into a partisan issue. But when you look at the way that the Biden administration has been treating the Netanyahu government and coalition parties in the government on the one hand, and Netanyahu, of course, still hasn't been invited to the White House either. Although I think the president of, was it Venezuela or Brazil? Lula was invited there. But Netanyahu hasn't been. And now this boycott of the coalition leaders. I think that we see here the truth about the allegations that Netanyahu is turning Israel into a partisan issue. It's actually, unfortunately, the Biden administration, by discriminating against the leaders of Israel, the democratically elected leaders of Israel, and And Jews in Israel, depending on where they live in this country, that is turning Israel into a partisan issue. People who have maintained faith with the traditional policy of the American government, which is to treat an allied government and allied people as allies and as friends, the Biden administration is discriminating against the ones that they don't like based on their partisan positions. And that, to me, is a very distressing thing. I hope it is rectified in the future, in the near future. But in the meantime, it's that together, obviously, with the Biden administration's overall policy regarding Iran, is a reason for concern. And I'll just tell you, in the Carolyn Glick show this week, I'll be talking about the new policy related to discriminating against Jews in Judea and Samaria by the State Department, and also the latest twists in the plot in Netanyahu's criminal trial. Just a spoiler alert, the prosecution's case has collapsed on the bribery charge. So we'll talk about that in the Carolyn Glick show this week. And I'll see you again next week from my cold open. Take care.